This video was made possible by our Patreon supporters. If you've been on the internet at all, you've undoubtedly seen the big white letters the Russians are painting on their vehicles. These are obviously for identification purposes, because even if a tank nerd can tell a Russian T-72B3 from a Ukrainian T-64BV up close, a few hundred meters away it might be a little harder. If you've ever seen the black chevrons on some Western tanks, or the D-Day invasion stripes from World War II, it's the same concept. But first, there have been a lot of theories floating around as to how the symbols are being used, many of which are clearly wrong, but keep ending up in my comments section. The most popular one is this one, and has been around since the first week of the conflict. This graphic is pretty much entirely wrong. It doesn't appear that the Russians are using letters to identify specific types of units. Rather, it's using them to identify all friendlies in a large area of operations. Let's take it to the map to figure out what's really going on. Preface this by saying, soldiers are soldiers, they will be inconsistent. Not every vehicle has a marking, and some markings are applied very haphazardly. First, the V is pretty consistently used by forces operating north of Kyiv and to the west of the Dnieper River. In this area, we've seen the V on BMDs and BTRDs, airborne infantry carriers used exclusively by the VDV. A big example was this column of BMDs that was ambushed at Hostomel, and the same thing happened at Irpin. We've seen this T-80 BVM in the woods roughly north of Kyiv with the V marking, this fuel truck near Demir, and this column of Chechens, notably with a V rather than the claimed X. I'm not going to show every piece of footage, but you can personally find a deluge of media that proves my point. Moving east of the Dnieper, forces that are advancing southwards around Chernihiv and westwards around Sumy generally have an O on their vehicles. Initially, it seemed that units in this area were a lot more inconsistent with the markings, some units neglecting them entirely. However, it seems that some are mainly painting the O's on the roofs of their vehicles, which would make them hard to spot from ground level. For example, in this now famous video of a combined arms column near Brovary, you can clearly see a large O painted on the roof of this TOS-1. They could be on other vehicles as well, but the video is too low quality to tell. And then you have this T-72B found in the Sumy Oblast. When the guy climbs on it, you can clearly see that an O is painted on the roof. Meanwhile, here at Trostyanets is a triple-wide convoy. You can clearly see the O's on the hoods of this BMP-2 and a bunch of the trucks. And then, near Konotop, these MTLBs had an O on them. Similar story with this BTR-82A in the Sumy Oblast. I think you get the picture. To their east on the Kharkiv axis is where forces are using the Z inside a box. As a case study, there are all sorts of vehicles from the 200th Arctic Motor Rifle Brigade scattered around the Kharkiv area, including T-80 BVMs, Akatsia self-propelled howitzers, Tor air defense systems, and supply trucks, most with the Z in a box. Now, this area is a little inconsistent. Some of the vehicles do lack the box around the Z, but a Z in a box appears like a much more common standard. This footage of a column is from Bolshansk, northeast of Kharkiv on the first day of the war, and they all feature the Z in a box. Notably, many of the platforms here, like the towed Mista-B howitzers, T-72B3 tanks, and TOS-1 thermobaric launchers are all used by different kinds of units, artillery brigades, maneuver units, and NBC defense troops respectively, so it's definitely a mixed formation. And lastly, the most well-known marking by far is the plain Z. This marking is for forces advancing north from Crimea, as evidenced by a huge amount of footage. As a sample, there's this BMD-2 in Crimea itself, these VDV armored vehicles on the road to Novokakhovka, these Tiger M's patrolling Novokakhovka itself, this Panzer and these Tunguskas near Mykolaiv, this BMP-3 near Mykolaiv, this BMP-3 near Tokmak, these National Guard vehicles near Melitopol, and this BM-21 Grad near Mariupol. Equipment captured from the Ukrainians and put into service by the Eastern Separatists also appears to use the Z. For example, this T-64BV tank, which was captured by the Separatists and then recaptured by the Ukrainians, as well as this Varta armored personnel carrier. I hope this has cleared up these symbols and where they're being used. If you liked it, check out this analysis of Russia's use of the T-80 tank in Ukraine and how we know what units they're from. We'll see you over there.